did I ever tell you the visit that we had to Lynn Johnston's house when we were interviewing her for the movie Stripped, the documentary Stripped?
The creator of For Better or For Worse. No, you have not told me this story.
She was an incredible host, really kind interviewer. I think she gave us like 2 hours and was just, in general, just super pleasant to talk to. Was a wonderful human being. We walk into her house. It was in a, I would say, slightly too very rural area of Canada. I won't give it away where it was, but it was rural enough where it's like, it took us a while to get there.
You didn't see, like, it wasn't like banjo player out on the front porch rural.
It was banjo player out on the porch rural, yes, but in a Canadian way. So I'm assuming there's a moose help playing the banjo in this case. There was definitely banjo possibilities were possible, but lovely neighborhood, but very, very, very rural. Yeah. So we get into her house, and I'm expecting. I don't know. I had a certain feeling for what I had not yet met her, and I had a sort of feeling of what she was going to be like based on years of reading her comics. We walk into the house, and right by the front door, leaning against the wall, maybe they were on a rack, just a series of shotguns and rifles. And I was like, oh, really? Lynn, what the? Hey-oh. And I was like, well, I guess she's a hunter. And she goes, no, I don't even hunt. The damn deer are always trying to eat my lettuce heads. So I've got to shoot over the deer to get them to go away.
So now, does she shoot at the deer, or does she shoot up into the air to scare the deer?
She didn't clarify, and I didn't ask. But there was a whole special freezer labeled venison in her kitchen. So I'm not sure,
really?
Brad. No, I'm kidding.
No, that sounds. Now you're talking about my family.
Yep.
No, that's. You know what's other than obviously Lynn Johnston with a shotgun. I never really thought of Canada as having rural areas like an Alabama type place in Canada. And now I'm fascinated with what that would be.
On one of my trips, I was sort of surprised by how, Canada's got some backcountry too.
Yeah.
You know, I always think of Canada like very much. Canada's like Vermont to me. Like the whole country's like Vermont. Like kind, like well-meaning. They've got good galoshes on.
Yeah.
You know, they're gonna give you some syrup if you ask for it. And
painfully polite.
Painfully polite. Yeah. Enjoys a good sporting match. All well educated. And then, there are some spots in Canada you drive through and you're like, oh, no, Canada has some backcountry. Canada has some backcountry.
I'm picturing if you transplant like an Alabama scenario into Canada, what do you have there? You've got maybe a still out back, except it's making maple syrup.
Instead of a couple wild hogs, you've got a couple wild, bison. What would you have up there?
Yeah, you've got the old guy on the front porch with his musket loader looking for revenuers. You know,
and instead of diddling, ding, 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 what would you have in Canada?
Oh gosh, what do you play at a hockey match? Doodly doo doo doo.
There's a guy just going by a local frozen lake on a Zamboni. How y'all doing? Welcome to Canada. I'm just Zamboniing up the lake.
Yeah, that's what you take on the family trip. You know, you load up the Zamboni and go to Canada's version of Wally World.
The Canadian version of Beverly Hillbillies is they loaded up the Zamboni and they headed to Ontario.
That's wonderful.
And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show apparently about making fun of Canada. I didn't intend to.
Kidding.
Sorry, Canada.
Canada taking a drubbing today.
I actually love Canada and Canadians. The show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. It's fun to imagine what weapon each famous cartoonist of our youth would have. Now that we know that Lynn Johnston had rifles. What do you think Jim Davis was taking shots at in the back of paws in Indiana?
Gosh, that's
these groundhogs. They keep going after my carrots.
And what was his weapon of choice? Is he a shotgun person? Is he more of a dagger person?
A dagger. That's a real way to go against nature. It's like you got a dagger in your teeth.
You got to get up close to a groundhog to kill it with a dagger. You've got to want that thing dead, and I think that might be the way to go there. You got to really get your hands dirty.
You personally have it in for that groundhog if you're going in for it with a dagger there. Well, my friend, we're still in the new year. Coming up, by the way, on one of our upcoming shows, not this episode, but we are going to do our 1, 3, and 5-year plans.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, quite honestly, audience, why we have not done it yet is we are recording these in sort of the recovery period after our break between Christmas and New Year's. And it does take a minute of firing up the old synapses and sitting down with a hot cup of coffee for a couple hours to plan out this 1, 3, and 5-year show. So we're giving it the good once over before we get into it.
Obviously, we're still recording this show in December. So we at this point, we're still seeing Christmas shots on social media, and we're seeing our ComicLab backers standing there with a brand new Cintiq 16, a Pro 16. This particular person said, I wanted a Wacom 1, and my wife was so excited about the 1, she upgraded and got a Wacom Pro 16 that this guy is now getting all set up doing comics on. And I got to tell you, there's nothing that makes me happier than seeing a ComicLab backer standing with their brand new Wacom Cintiq in their hand.
I got to tell you, what made me laugh about that tweet is because we're all kids inside. Yeah. And I remember certain photos of my Christmases from my youth where it's like me holding this big RC car or something with like the biggest shit-eating grin.
Yeah.
And it was so delightful to see this person with just a smile from ear to ear holding up this massive Cintiq box like an 8-year-old. It's great. I loved it.
What was the Christmas present that made you smile that way?
Oh, Brad, there was a year, I don't know what happened, but I was significantly younger. I was the youngest of 7, and the closest sibling to me was 5 years older, right? And so, but there was a year where I was like 9 or 10, which would have made her like 14, 15. She was long past the sort of Santa stage. I was still a little tiny bit in the Christmas, spirit. Yeah. And I think my parents, as the last hurrah, went nuts for me that Christmas.
Yeah.
And I got the G.I. Joe helicopter, the G.I. Joe tank, the couple G.I. I was so into G.I. Joe. It was and I was smiling from ear to ear, and I got my older teen brothers to play G.I. Joe with me, and they're like, we need to make whole bases. They were making cardboard bases with me. It was just so fun as a little kid.
Great Christmas memory.
Well, how about you? What's the one that stands out for you?
The all-time big one, and this is such a badass thing. We got our first video game console, but it wasn't an Atari. Because this was like, I remember in the 70s, late 70s, maybe early 80s. Wasn't an Atari. It wasn't, what were the other ones? Commodore. And there was another Intellivision.
Intellivision was later, yeah.
It was none of those. Sears came out with a knockoff video console that Magnavox created called the Odyssey 2. And we had gotten that for Christmas. And you would have thought that we were the kings of the world, the Geiger boys that year. We had gotten a brand new Odyssey 2 video game console. But all of their games, Pac-Man was the big game, right?
Right.
They didn't have Pac-Man. They had Casey Munchkin. It played exactly because he munched, right?
Oh my God!
It played exactly like Pac-Man. The characters were just close enough to be just this side of trademark and copyright law. Like the Pac-Man had little antenna, so it was different. Just enough to be different. But it played exactly like Pac-Man.
Oh my God! I just Googled Casey Munchkin. This is ridiculous. This existed? Oh my God, it absolutely is Pac-Man. Yes. It's exactly Pac-Man. It's a shitty version of Pac-Man.
It's exactly the same. They had their version of Space Invaders. They had their version of Donkey Kong.
How did this not get sued out of existence? I guess it's just differentiated enough.
It was just enough. It was just enough. And Sears at that point...
hold on, Brad. In 1982, the appellate court found that Philips had copied Pac-Man and made alterations that only tend to emphasize the extent to which it deliberately copied the plaintiff's work. The ruling was the first one to establish how copyright law would apply to the look and feel of computer software.
Really?
So they were the first ones to lose a copyright case. Brad, you gave us a little moment of history. Casey Munchkin lost the copyright dispute against Pac-Man. That's great.
Fantastic. Yeah, they had a version of Donkey Kong called Pickaxe Pete. They even had
God bless
Oh, I know.
They just sat 3 software engineers in a room and said, "What can we copy?"
Everything. But for us, man, we used to play that game. You remember the AC adapter?
The big chonkin,
the big little brick that you plugged into the wall. We would play that until it got hot to the touch, and my dad would come over and say, "That's it. You guys got to turn this thing off and go do something else for an hour and let this thing cool down." Kids were coming from all over the neighborhood. It was literally the best Christmas.
It was like in a Bad Axe, Michigan way. So just for everyone's reminder, Brad grew up in Bad Axe, Michigan, on the northern peninsula of the thumb of Michigan, if you want to look for it.
That's correct.
It is a place to look for on Google Maps. Anyway, so when you got this what was it called?
It was the Odyssey
Magnavox?
2. Yes.
When you got the Odyssey 2, was this as big a deal in Bad Axe as when Miss Elliott down the street had gotten indoor plumbing? Was that as big a deal?
Yeah. The fact that she didn't have to go walking out at night anymore and go to that outhouse.
First one in the neighborhood. That was amazing.
A big deal. People were coming from miles around just to have a flush. And that's probably why we got that game, because up until then, all of those pages from the Sears catalog had gotten ripped out.
Oh, good one, too. Good follow-up. Brad, all right, well, that leads us right into the fantastic first question from Patreon.com ComicLab listener Jay and Jenny.
Yeah.
And they write, Dear Drawnomic Duo. By the way, Dear Drawnomic Duo.
Oh,
I have to say, Jay, Jenny, kudos to you both on that question. That is fantastic. Or on that nom de plume, I guess.
Yeah.
Drawnomic Duo is the best one we've ever gotten. That one's great.
Drawnomic Duo. That's worth doing a little logo design for. That's fantastic.
So here's the question itself. I would like to know how you are assessing business decisions for the coming year. With so much still up in the air, are you even thinking about doing any conventions this year, if they are even available? Will you be running extra Kickstarters to cover any shortfall? How much has the last year hit your finances? So that's 3 good questions, 3 really good questions. And let's tackle them all. Why not? So Jay and Jenny, here we go. How are we assessing business decisions for the coming year? Brad, you want to jump in on that first, or do you want me to start off?
You know what? You go. You got a good head of steam going. You go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm taking a case that the first 2 quarters are going to be very different from the second 2 quarters.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it's all said and done, there's going to be a massive wave of bankruptcies across the U.S. and Europe and Canada, even after the pandemic is over. Because remember, businesses that had been keeping it together, they're going to have, like, say, that PPP funding pulled back. They're going to have a lot of the things that had been waived, like mortgage expenses, rent expenses, that if not waived, they were being, pushed under the table for a couple of months, hoping the pandemic would end, right?
Yeah.
All of that's going to come due. We're going to have bankruptcies even after the pandemic is over. And so there's definitely going to be this weird recovery period that we haven't seen in a long time, because it's not that the businesses themselves were a problem, it's that it was a disease-based economic thing. What I'm saying is, it's not like the housing crash. It's something very different. But at the same time, you're going to have all these other businesses that flourished under the pandemic. A lot of big tech flourished under the pandemic. Home shopping flourished under big tech. Amazon flourished under big tech, or under the pandemic. So what's going to happen is you're going to have this spurt of growth, because there's also going to be this pent-up demand for travel, to go out to restaurants, do all sorts of things like that. So there's going to be all this cash flowing, and yet there is still going to be a faltering economy for people, for, say, service worker jobs, because a lot of those businesses will still have gone under. So it's going to be a weird 6 months even after the pandemic is over. That being said, I think most of my readers fall into the latter group, in terms of being more savvy online, just by the nature of the way they found this comic. Mm-hmm. If they are reading enough online that they're searching out comics online, they are probably pretty tech savvy as a family. And so they're probably going to be more willing to buy online, all the sort of things that we've benefited by, in terms of self-selecting readers. So I think the latter half of my 2021 is going to be pretty good. I think the next 6 months are going to be pretty painful still for the economy in general. But it depends. I think it's really interesting to see if we're going to go back to a version of what we were, or whether it's going to be even more over the top, really in a roaring 20s kind of way, if people go nuts. And I can see it going the second way if the economy picks up steam quickly. And then we're going to have kind of a roaring 20s couple of years, basically a superheated economy as people just want to spend and do and go and see and be with each other, that kind of thing. Brad, what are your thoughts?
I think you're absolutely right. This is definitely going to be something that we don't really know where we are in 2021 until we're halfway through it coming out of it. You know what I mean? It's going to be summer until we get all of the vaccinations and, we start to come around to the other side of this thing, that we really know what 2021 is going to be about. So I think in terms of planning 2021, I think a lot of it has got to be kind of a replay of 2020, where we kind of do a wait and see attitude. We don't make big plans. Like, for example, of course, now, one of the things that these folks brought up was comic conventions. Now, you and I have very different ideas on comic conventions.
Yes.
I swore off comic conventions full stop well over 5 or 6 years ago. I just said, listen, there's nothing here for me. This is not a net gain for me. I'm not making enough money to justify the ridiculous amounts of time that I'm putting into it. And that time can be better spent doing other things. So I completely stopped. And by the way, I advocate that strongly for people, that you take a really hard look at whether you're actually making enough money to justify that week that you're preparing before the show, that week that you're losing during the show, and then that week that you lost after the show, recovering from the show. You're losing 3 weeks of productivity. In many cases. Is that a net gain for you?
Right.
But I know you still do a couple comic conventions.
I do,
Speaking specifically about comic conventions, what are your thoughts for 2021?
Well, I don't remember if I was scheduled to do 2 or 3 conventions in 2020, but like the fact that they were completely gone meant a loss of about 18 to 25,000 in gross income for those 2 to 3 shows, depending on which ones they were. And so for me, though, Comic-Cons are still a good, and keep this as a key indicator, Comic-Cons are still worthwhile for me, only because I have certain key products that spin out a lot of money fairly easily. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. If I just had Drive as a property, I don't know that I would do Comic-Cons. Drive does not sell hugely well. It does okay, but it's not enough. You know what I mean? Like, booths are expensive, travel is expensive, hotels are expensive, flights are expensive. And so for me, the fact that I have that Pug book, which just spins out money, the fact that I have Sheldon Originals, which are pure profit and a high price, and those sell well at shows, that underwrites and the profit margin for all my shows. So what I'm getting at is, if I just had Drive, like Brad, I would probably say, I don't know that I'm doing Comic-Cons, but because I still have Sheldon and I have all these unique things with Sheldon and also my pins are oddly making a lot of money lately on shows. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, heed Brad's advice. Be very specific and careful if you're going to think about doing shows, especially this coming year, because even long-term veterans like myself who know how to do shows well and which ones to do well, I am coming at this with all the hesitancy I can muster, because let's say, for example, Brad, San Diego Comic-Con, it's literally a drive down the road for me. I load up my Honda Odyssey, I drive down to San Diego, I have family down there, it's easy peasy, I grew up in San Diego, I know it, I know the show.
Yeah.
If it happens, and that's a huge if San Diego Comic-Con happens, it'll be a weird show this year. Are there going to be health checks where you have to show some sort of passport on your phone to get in? Is it going to mean a limitation in crowd size? Are people not going to travel internationally to the U.S. Because there's a hesitancy to go to the U.S. based on how we handled the pandemic? Are things going to have turned around in the next 6 months? There's a lot of things to consider. And the reason why I mentioned international travelers is because those were always big spenders for me at Comic-Con. If someone is coming from Germany to the U.S. to see me, they drop a surprisingly large amount of cash because they're like, I'm never coming back, so I'm going to drop it all on this. Whereas if someone's coming from Scottsdale, they're like, I'll see you next year, that kind of thing. You know, what I'm getting at is there's a lot of considerations for a Comic-Con this year. And boy, I'm going at it with like someone really unsure of how this is going to work. I honestly don't know. I personally don't think San Diego Comic-Con will happen. I don't know that we'll have enough herd immunity at that point.
At all?
I don't know. To me, like, put yourself in the health director of San Diego County or the city of San Diego. Would you allow it to go forward if there's not a quantifiable herd immunity in San Diego yet? Especially knowing that those travelers might be bringing in, like, even if you as a city have verified that you have a herd immunity with X number of your population vaccinated, now you suddenly are welcoming in 100,000 people from outside of the city. That's a little tricky. Like, if you're the health director of San Diego, you're like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to open up the show.
Yeah, and then you've got to weigh that against the amount of money that brings in
an undeniably huge amount of hundreds of millions of dollars for San Diego. Yes, yeah.
And so what's going to happen is, especially in the middle there, right when San Diego is happening, you're going to have a gray area during which you've got just about enough vaccinations and whatever herd immunity that you can muster.
Right.
Just about, you're going to have a gray area where it's almost there. And people are going to,
it's going to be so
you know
close.
What's going to happen, because we're very much a capitalist society. We're going to make that decision.
We're going to make the decision to go forward with it.
We're going to floor it, and then we're going to pay the price.
Yeah, you know what? You're right.
My guess is that San Diego happens, but the ripple effect from San Diego is going to be so severe that some of the shows later in the summer and early fall are going to be canceled because we have this big ripple effect that comes out from it.
You know what's interesting? The good news for San Diego is I don't think that they will be the test case, if you know what I mean, nationally. Some kind of event will happen in May, June in the U.S. Some concert series is going to be like, we're starting up again. And they're going to be the test case. Basically, they're going to be the canary in the coal mine. And then health directors will look at that and go, oh, yikes, look at what happened at, I don't know. I was trying to think of that concert series that happens in the desert. What is that one?
Fire Festival?
No, Fire Festival. No, that one was already a train wreck. But no, I can't think of it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Look at two old guys trying. What?
Burning Man?
No, not Burning Man. But that was also yes, Lollapalooza. That's the one in the desert. Yeah. Anyway, what I'm getting at is, as far as shows go, it will be an interesting year. I personally don't think that in part two, keep in mind that the vaccination rates will depend on whether the Johnson & Johnson vaccine comes out. Because if we have 3, the vaccination rates happen much quicker.
Yeah.
If we have 2, and one of them is the Pfizer vaccine, which takes a lot of weird transportation requirements, it's a much slower vaccination rate than if we also get the Johnson. Because Johnson & Johnson is a one-shot, room temperature shot. Yeah. That's much easier than 2 shots at negative 70 degrees Celsius, whatever it is, the Pfizer. That thing's ridiculous. So amazing science, but tricky transpo and logistics on that one. So what I'm getting at is I'm on the fence. I personally don't think San Diego Comic-Con will happen, but I think some of the ones in the fall definitely will happen. And I'll be honest, Brad, one thing that I want to talk with you about, I miss them. I not just in a financial sense, I miss them emotionally. I'm surprised by how much I miss them. So
I am too. Well, and I saw that happen when we did the virtual convention together. I could see how much you were really, really enjoying that and how much you got from that. I don't think I'm wired that way. Yeah. And I don't think my audience is that type of people that show up to that. But I really saw you in your element there. And I could understand how you could miss that over a year's time.
Yeah, I mean, a couple years back when I learned the phrase extroverted introvert, that's a good descriptor of what I am. I will always choose to be myself. But on the rare occasions where I do go out, I do generate a certain amount of energy from a social interaction. And Comic-Cons, but I'm also exhausted afterward. I don't want to do it every day or every weekend. But once a year, kind of like a Christmas or a birthday, I'm put on the San Diego Comic-Con hat, and I'm a carnival barker for 5 days, and I love it.
So now, what else do you have planned to circumvent this? In other words, coming into 2021, we kind of have an idea what to expect from 2020. Do you have extra Kickstarters planned, like this person asked, or these? There was a couple. Do you have extra Kickstarters? Are you allowing for any of that to change your typical year that you would have planned?
Well, that's a great question. I this year, if the fates are smiling, this is going to be the Kickstarter for the third Drive book. And those are have been, I don't want to knock on wood here, hugely successful for me in a way that they supplement following years. You sort of meter it out. And so I'm very excited about that. So I'm probably okay from a Kickstarter standpoint, but I'll be honest that my 2020 was about staying afloat. That's what it was.
Yes.
In previous years, my goal was always to grow my business 5-10% from the previous year. And last year, I very quickly went, nope, no growth this year. Just stay afloat. Just cover all your expenses, cover everything you need to do. This is not a year for look at the incredible growth I've had. Yeah. And yet the year did okay. How about for you? I haven't done all the nitty gritty of my finances yet, but so this is a little bit premature. But
I did really well. I did about the same as I had in the previous year because an awful lot of my income came through Patreon and running Kickstarters. Thanks to this show, I got my act together a little bit more in terms of Kickstarter. So I had run a Kickstarter that went very, very well. Yeah. And so I actually did okay in terms of that sort of thing. But that brings me to my next point, and that is we talk about not safe for work comics here every now and again. There is something on the horizon that really threatens my 2021 and the 2021 of a lot of people, and that's a new legislation that's got bipartisan support, or at least it's got a Republican and a Democrat that's sponsoring the legislation. It's called the Stop Internet Exploitation Act, SISEA. And the whole idea, as with most things, it's a very good idea. In other words, it says if somebody gets a video uploaded that they don't want uploaded, it gives them tools that they can use to address that, which is a great idea, right? Nobody would want something like that. It's a horrible thing. But it's written right now very broadly. And it's one of those things, even though Patreon has been lockstep in support of creators of adult content from the very start. I mean, there was so many, we've talked about this on the show. Yeah. There's been so many times when they could have thrown not safe for work artists all overboard, and they didn't. They re-upped their commitment time and time again when other places like Tumblr, for example, and Ko-Fi were jettisoning adult content creators. Patreon was reaffirming their backing of us. This legislation could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is, and I've got I've always said I've got a plan B. I've got in mind what I'm going to need to do to address that if that does happen. But I'll tell you what, even more than vaccines and herd immunity, the one thing that has me very nervous about the upcoming year is that legislation. And I will say, if you're somebody that either creates not safe for work comics or art, or just plain old enjoys them, you do owe it to yourself to get in touch with your member of Congress and give them a heads up about this, that it's written very broadly, and it's a good idea, but it needs to be wizened up a little bit, sharpened, because it could very well have some ripple effects that hurt a lot of us.
Well, this is not for today, but for a future show, I would actually like to game out how we could re-engineer your career if Patreon got pulled out from underneath you. That would be that would be I think a necessary 10-minute conversation.
Oh yeah.
Because, for example, this coming year will use Kickstarter for that Drive thing. But let's say, for example, that Kickstarter got pulled out from underneath me if they got the SEC filing, they messed up, and then they had to close down as a company or something. Right? It's just some imaginary event. But if it didn't exist, I'd be in trouble in part, Yeah. And so if Patreon got pulled away from you, you would undeniably be in trouble, and it would be worthwhile
at least in the short term. Yeah,
in the short term,
it would be something I would need to reinvent and reimagine a lot of ways that I do things as a matter of natural course right now.
And it would be worthwhile, given the fact how changeable the world is right now. It's worthwhile just to see, because even if we're preparing for the worst case scenario, but we might create a best case scenario where you already have Patreon as a base income, but now from brainstorming, we have some other source of income from a 10-minute conversation. So that might be a fun topic for a future show, Brad, that we talk about, because if this is a very real threat staring you in the face, then we should stare at it right back. Anyway, so let me ask you. So your income was much the same for 2020, and I have to say, as far as Patreon goes, I found the same to be the case, and it really speaks to how distributed fundraising, distributed support is a surprisingly solid base of income for an artist, right?
It really is. In fact, what it shows is that digital content is very valuable. We've seen that time and time again. Exclusive digital content has a very solid value. And what it showed is that age-old idea that we talk about during the Great Recession. Movie theaters were still in business because people wanted a inexpensive way of getting a little bit of entertainment into their lives. We saw that holding true in 2020 because that's what we were doing. We were doing a very inexpensive entertainment that, as long as you were putting something out that people felt was worth supporting, if your work was good, etc., then people were supporting it. We saw, and it's something that I think we need to keep reminding ourselves as creators, because we keep kind of dropping back to, it's the physical goods that are worth a lot. It's the books, it's the T-shirts, it's the prints, it's the original art. When in reality, people really do they really do value that exclusive digital content.
Yeah, I mean, I am not the one that thought of this. Much smarter minds than I have talked about this in journalism. But we basically, as a culture, jumped ahead 5 years in the pandemic in terms of adaptation with electronics. And so you had things like telemedicine, which I had never done anything like that before. And I've since had 4 doctor's visits over this pandemic with telemedicine. More if you count the rest of the family. Teleeducation, we had never done that before. There's never going to be snow days again. Your kids are going to go to school. You're going to go to school via Zoom now. Like that's fundamentally culture changing to not have to go to a doctor for a basic update, to not have to. I mean, so in all sorts of ways, especially older generations have had to jump into technology in a way that they previously wouldn't have dipped a toe, maybe. So we all kind of basically got a 4 or 5 year baptism by fire. And even physical sales, like if you're a company, a small size company, you're still going to send the salesperson to fly out to Des Moines to meet the company to make the initial sale. Right. But are you going to fly back every 6 months like you used to do? Or are you going to do a Zoom meeting check-in now? You're probably going to do a Zoom meeting. So the nature of travel is going to change. What I'm getting at is, in this 12-month period of this pandemic, we have jumped 4 or 5 years ahead, and that will change how we do our business as cartoonists, too, because people are much more willing to get their entertainment from their iPad now than they were. And that might sound ridiculous to you if you're already an iPad user, but there's a lot of people for whom picking up a physical magazine or going to a physical movie theater was the way to do it. And now they're like, that's fine. This is fine. I'll just do it all through my iPad,
Yeah, and in some ways better. Just to bolster your argument a little bit more, throw in working from home to that 5 year jump, and you've got the whole enchilada right there. There's been a lot of ways we've changed that. So let's bring this full circle, because we had one more topic that fits into this that I think we can address very quickly. What didn't you accomplish in 2020 that you may be bringing back for 2021? Was there something that for whatever reason you weren't able to do that now you're going to bring it forward, or you're just going to say, you know what, the time for that is come and gone, and I might readdress it years down the road, but it's not coming back in the short foreseeable future?
Okay, great question. So the one of the first ones is I have missed the networking that going to shows gives me. And the big impact there is usually in the stories that I commission for Drive for Tales of the Drive. By the way, I got to talk to you about one you were going to do. I forgot to follow up with you. Sorry, I just remembered that. That's on me. I forgot to follow up with you about that. We'll talk about that after the show. And then, but those kind of commissions directly come from me walking around Emerald City Comic Con in the artist alley going, oh, holy shit, that's an art style. I want to work with that person, you know? Oh, what a neat idea for a comic book. I want to hire her as a writer, that kind of thing. So that's diminished a little bit. And then also, there was a huge project for me, Storyline, that I wanted to do in 2020, which was going to be long-form interviews with comics creators and writers. And that, I would hope, in the latter part of 2021, if not early 2022, we'll be able to pick that back up again. I still think there's a fun in that project and joy in that project, and I would love to do it.
I was wondering about that. Because one of those interviews I really want to see one of these days. I really want to see that.
All right, slow it down over there.
Me!
Yeah, I know. But it was just to remind everybody what the idea was. The idea was fireside chats with scotch in hand, 2 smoking chairs, and artists sitting and talking about the art that they love and their journey on it and the philosophies underpinning the art for them, right? So long-form discussions in a sort of inside the actor studio way with artists about their cartooning. And Brad obviously was one of the interviews, but I'd love to get back to that. How about you? What for you went away in 2020 or that you missed, or opportunities or projects that you were going to do that didn't happen that you would love to see brought back or that have missed their time?
The only one that I really wanted to do was the 2nd edition of the Webcomics Handbook. By the way, just on a totally separate note, do you think I should call it the Webcomics Handbook 2nd edition, or do you think I should come up with a completely new title and put it out as a 3rd standalone book from the series?
I think a 3rd standalone book.
Do you really?
My gut, having put no thought into this at all, my gut tells me that a 3rd title would sell better than a 2nd edition, because there's always that tiny bit of consumer confusion of 2nd edition. Is it a revised version of the 1st edition, or is it totally new material? Does that make sense? You know,
and it's very much. I mean, there's going to be some carryover from the previous book, obviously, but it's going to be so different from the first book that and here's the other thing. I'm starting to wonder. And Scott brought this idea up a long time ago. Scott Kurtz, the creator of PvP, he brought this up maybe even back when we were still doing Webcomics Weekly. Is the term webcomic starting to get dated? In other words, there's a whole group of young people for whom they don't even know the term webcomic. They do know the term webtoon. They're webtoon readers, but they're not necessarily webcomic readers. And there's a whole nother generation of people who are coming to independent publishing on the web that they just look at this as indie comics, independent comics. My question that I'm trying to suss out for myself, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is the term webcomic starting to become kind of an anachronism?
Boy, we are touching on a lot of topics with this one question, Jay and Jenna. You really
there's a lot of there.
There's a lot of there. So my answer, Brad, is I hadn't put no thought into it, but yes, it is becoming kind of dated now that I think about it. And the reason why I say that is, if you are a cartoonist that's not working on the web, who the hell are you these days? Like, you're either doing a Marvel or a DC print book that also is appearing, somewhere else, but it's mainly still, designed for print. Or maybe you still have a newspaper career, but probably a second job, because I don't know if that's paying enough yet.
Yeah.
So, like, what I'm getting at is we're all kind of working digitally now, or at least 80% of us are. So it's weird to delineate. I mean, maybe I've always been happy calling myself just a cartoonist. And maybe that's just the way to call it now. I don't know.
That's my point. Have we gotten to the point finally that we take all of the prefixes and suffixes off,
the differentiators off,
and instead it's just a book on comics now, because that's really what it is. Because the percentage of people that are going to be using this book and doing work for Marvel and DC, let's face it, that's going to be a handful of people now. If DC even continues to publish.
Yeah,
right. So now, you got to take those people and put them aside, because out of the thousands and thousands of people that want this book, you don't write it for the handful of people that are doing work for Marvel and DC. Same thing for newspaper syndication, which I've argued before is generously 20 years out of step, maybe more realistically up to 40 years out of step. It can't be for that anymore. So why do we put the web in front of comics? It isn't. This is comics now. This thing
is
that
comics
we're
now.
doing is comics.
Yeah. We haven't revisited the topic since the beginning of the pandemic, and we kind of forecasted it in our conversation in March or April. But have we checked in on, is there anybody tracking how many comic book shops have closed since the pandemic started?
I'm sure somebody
it can't
has
be a small
that
amount.
number, but
it cannot. I mean, I'm sure only Diamond would know for sure, but how would you survive 12 plus months on a comic book shop income without customers walking in the door? That business has absolutely changed. There's no way we come out of this and DC and Marvel are like, we're going to do it the way we always did it. I mean, there's no way they come out of that that way.
Nope. That's a change that's going to be forced. It's going to have.
I mean, it was a long time coming, but this had to have been the death knell of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But the thing is, there's still an appetite for comic book stories. I still love a good image graphic novel, and so I don't know. Anyway, it's interesting that so much change has been compressed into this 12-month period.
Mm-hmm.
There's that terrible phrase that people use with capitalism, creative destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And we have experienced a little too much creative destruction in 12 months. But I think, Jay and Jenny, I think we answered all 3 or 4 of your questions. Brad, the one thing that we didn't ask you, will you be running any extra Kickstarters or handling them differently in 2021?
Extra Kickstarters, no. I'll probably do, I'm due for an Evil Inc. Kickstarter for the new Evil Inc. book. That'll probably happen in the summer. The how-to book will, if I'm smart, I'll start working on that in the early part of 2021. So I don't have anything extra planned in that regard. But again, 2021, I think for me is going to be one where I really, really have to keep a little bit extra nimble, especially like I said, with that legislation on hand. I don't have anything written in stone for this year. I'm very much keeping my head on a swivel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, just to put a button on this Jay and Jenny question, which is a great question. I will say this: I've been having weird, unfocused nightmares, probably because like this generalized anxiety of like pandemic, economic recession, all this sort of stuff. And I had this weird nightmare the other day that I had been assigned my vaccination time at this big tent at UCLA Hospital in Los Angeles, right? But I missed it. And that was my nightmare, that I missed my appointment time for my vaccination.
Yeah.
And they're like, nope, there's only so many supply. You missed your time. And that was my whole nightmare. So congratulations, Dave's Brain. You're a horror show of terrible ideas. Oh, my
God. Yeah, as if there aren't enough realistic things to worry about. Now you're making them up.
My brain's like, I think because to me, the vaccination represents the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And if I somehow miss it, I will have blown my opportunity to start putting this to an end. I don't know.
Isn't that amazing, though, that isn't it funny how your brain works? Your brain came up with a narrative, to scare your brain. Like in that moment, that was real. When you woke up, it was still real enough that you were having anxiety about it, but it all came from your brain. Your brain created a story to scare your brain.
Yeah, it did. You're right.
Humans are weird.
The brain is... thanks, brain. What a jerk. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. Well, I know we said we put a button on it, but one other thing I want to say about 2021, Brad, is there's that phrase, I forget what his name was, but he had that differentiation between unknown unknowns and known unknowns. And what's interesting about 2021 is we actually know the unknowns that are coming. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we know that if Johnson & Johnson comes out with a third vaccine, that's good. We know if Novavax comes out with a fourth vaccine, that's doing pretty good. We know that there's a lot of savings that were generated in 2020 that might suddenly start flowing in 2021 in terms of household savings. Like, there's a lot of known unknowns for 2021, which is interesting from a planning standpoint, is that we actually do know a fair amount about the year ahead, that really we have 6 more months of hell to go through. And then, frankly, it's not a light switch, but like a dimmer switch. It's going to start turning towards, oh, wow, the floodgates are really starting to flow in terms of finances and kids back at school and all sorts of stuff. So there actually is a fair amount of planning that can be done. It's just weird. It's all weird.
And I think the main thing is that you've got to, again, allow yourself the ability to stay loose and not get too upset about things that don't get done this year, in the same way we advise people not to be hard on themselves in 2020 if there are certain things that fell by the wayside. Because even though you've got known unknowns, there's still unknowns.
They're still unknowns.
So you've got to be easy on yourself. You got to take it easy and say, okay, I'm gonna go a little loose again this year, because there's going to be a lot of things that you just can't control.
Right. Yeah. A lot of things that are very large chess pieces that are out of your control, and so you've got to be able to roll with the punches. Anyway, Brad, let's move on to our next question from another Patreon backer over at patreon.com/ComicLab. I also forgot how to say patreon.com, basically, apparently, in the intervening new year. So here we go. This one says, after listening to all your podcasts and pro tips, especially the ones on Patreon, Brad struck a chord with me when he said, they ain't buying what I'm selling. I have had a Patreon now for over a year and have been struggling with enticing new people into my club. I offer digital downloads, sketches of characters, as well as, don't shoot me, physical rewards like exclusive prints and stickers. I am considering in the new year to totally revamp my Patreon and start over. Into what I have to give some serious thought, but what is the best way to go about this and not piss off the few followers I already have? Or wouldn't Brad care? I'm sure Dave would feel some guilt, they say. Thanks for the awesome podcast and all the friendly advice. It is the utter joy of my week to listen to you two take the piss out of each other and still be amazing friends. And then there's, I believe, a bit of Scottish. I the new. I don't know. Let me try to Scottish that up. I the new. I don't know what that means. Anyway, that comes in from George McKay over at patreon.com/ComicLab. Thank you, George. So, Brad, the central question is how to change a Patreon without pissing off the current backers.
Okay, so here's something that we have to remind people from time to time that they've got in their toolkit, and that is that you can grandfather out Patreon tiers. In other words, you can unpublish a Patreon tier.
Yes.
And is the technical term for it. What that does, it does not get rid of those Patreon backers. They still have access. They still are going to get charged at the top of every month, just like normal. But your new incoming people who are considering the Patreon, that tier will be invisible to them. Okay? So what you do is you unpublish the tiers that you don't want to support anymore, and you come up with new tiers. Those new people come in and see your new tiers. They don't see the invisible tiers. And you make the change from there. Now, you don't do this without talking to your existing Patreon backers first. And of course, what you do there is say, here's this change that I'm planning on making. Here's what I'm planning on doing. Here's why I'm doing it. Here's the reasons. Here's the changes that are going to be made. I'm going to give you a month notice in advance so that if you do want to opt out, you can. Let's face it, you don't want to see that happen, but it's only fair. You don't want them opted into something they don't want. and you say here, but you set it up by saying, here's why I'm doing what I'm going to do. Here's why it's necessary. And then you give them time that they can opt out before they get charged again. And then you pick up the pieces, whatever those may be. If you lose a lot of Patreon backers, well, you lost them. Yeah, and if it's not a finite pool that you're fishing from, you're just going to have to find some new ones and hope that you made the right choice in this new direction. And by the way, it's always the right choice because this is what you creatively want to do. Right, and therefore, it's the right choice.
It's better for the, yeah.
Yeah, and then move forward at that point and doing what you need to do. Now, here's something that we really need to talk about, because I think it was a throwaway in fact, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that it was just a throwaway comment, or wouldn't Brad care, right? And you got to understand this, or would Dave feel guilty? And again, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt is probably a throwaway comment, but because we're talking to people on this show in terms of let's all share what we know about what we're doing, I can't let that slide because it shows such a disconnect from reality. It shows that, again, it was probably a joke. But in case it wasn't, or in case there's somebody else that might agree with that statement, it's such a misunderstanding of what's actually going on Patreon that we've got to take a second and address it. It isn't about whether I care or Dave cares or you, the Patreon creator, cares. It's not about that at all. And you got to get your head into the right mindset so that you can make a good decision. The fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter that if the Patreon creator cares or not. I'm telling you, your Patreon backers don't care. Or conversely, they care, but not in what you think they care.
I'm not following. What do you?
I'm going to explain. Here's the deal. They're Patreon
Did you
backers.
Say explain? I'm going to explain. What are you, Ricky Ricardo, all of a sudden? Lucy, I'm going to explain.
Here's the deal. They care about you. They are Patreon backers because they like you. They like what you do.
Oh, I see what you're getting at. Okay.
They are on Team George. They like George, right?
Right.
It isn't about, well, I don't care, so I'm making this. No. Get your head on straight. Those Patreon backers who are there like the thing that you do. Now, if you're offering exclusive and all that other stuff, they probably like the exclusives that you're offering. And this is why you have to be very careful about how you parse it to those backers. They might be, oh, geez, I really like this thing. I'm sad to see it go. If you can replace it with another thing that's just as good or better, they're going to be fine with it. And yeah, you might lose a couple of them that really liked that thing, but that's okay. There's more where that came from. It's not about whether you are expressing not caring or caring. The fact of the matter is your Patreon backers don't care. Because what they don't care about the thing, they care about you. And if they like this thing that you do, they're going to like this next thing that you do, or a large percent of them will, because they like the way you do things. The Patreon backers are the people that they are the 1%. They are the people that have ponied up money because they like what you do. That makes them incredibly special people to you. And yeah, I can understand you're scared about losing them, but you don't understand. They like what you do. That's why they're here. That's why they're Patreon backers. That's why they're paying money every month. They are going to be on Team George, whatever George does, as long as George gives them good reasons, gives them another reward that's just as good, or maybe even, God only knows, maybe a little bit better in the perception of the Patreon backers, they're going to be on Team George. It's not about expressing this idea of, well, I don't care, or I'm going to tell you shouldn't care. It's not about that. It's about what the Patreon backers, I keep telling you, if you're looking at Patreon as what's in it for me as a creator, you got your head screwed on, facing the wrong direction. Patreon is about what's in it for the backers. That's how they look at it. That's what you should be looking at. And it's going to help you make a good decision in this because it's what they want. and what they want is what's good for George.
So good is that answer that I'm actually not even going to amend it or revise it. I think Brad expressed it exactly how I would have said it.
Yeah.
And so I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a button on George's question by giving the people what they want and explaining what "och I the new" means.
Oh, good. What did it mean?
I have since consulted the good folks over at Wikipedia, and apparently it's an archetypal example of an overt Scotticism, which translates as "oh yes, just now." The phrase is often used to parody by non-Scots because it wouldn't normally be used. You would either say "och eh" or "the new," but you would rarely use them together. So it's sort of a stereotypical archetypal, like, this is how silly Scotticisms are by non-Scots.
And it means, oh, yes, the now?
Oh, yes, the now. Okay, the new, I guess. I've never heard that one myself.
Wow,
but
it sounds wonderful. But I don't know what "oh, yes, the now" means.
What's funny is if you talk to a Scotsman, especially like after a couple of bitters or a shot of whiskey, it literally is like trying to figure out, it's like someone speaking Middle English to someone today. You're like, I get most of what you're saying, but it's really interesting. You're like, or sometimes when you're speaking to a Welshman, like it's like, I get most of what you're saying, but not all of what you're saying. And it's really an interesting experience when you're both speaking English, but there's enough of just a cultural differentiation where you're like, ooh, I think you're insulting me, or maybe you're telling me I'm your best friend. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure whether I should be upset about this or not.
Are we entering a business relationship, or are you proposing marriage? I'm not sure what's happening here.
Well, listen, Dave, to wrap up the show, I've got a question from a $5 Patreon backer, Dorian Gray, who says, now this is a contender along with Drawnomic Duo. Hello, my turtle doves of comics advice.
Oh,
Speaking of, is this a business proposal or a wedding proposal? This one's a little bit mushy. Hello, my turtle doves.
Aren't turtle doves traditionally associated with Christmas? Am I mistaken?
Well, yeah, I think the two turtle doves is in the 12 days of Christmas.
So when I was a kid, I legitimately thought that turtle doves were turtles that had wings on them.
Really?
When I was a little kid, I was like, what's a turtle dove?
Did your parents use a lot of lead paint?
Well, no, it was a lot of hits on the head from bricks just falling from nearby buildings. Did your parents use a lot of lead paint? What a great comment.
Well, here's what Dorian's question is. Dave has said that a sizable chunk, in fact, you said just today, sizable chunk of his income is from original art sales.
Yes.
I'm guessing this is preventing him from drawing Sheldon digitally. Have either of you tried to make or sell originals of your digital comics? Back in Webcomics Weekly, the idea of taping paper on top of his antique, which I don't recommend, and using a pencil attachment to the stylus was broached. Maybe pull a Thomas Kincaid and draw on top of a print. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Dorian, so Dave, digital originals. What are your thoughts? I originally looked at this question. I'm like, dumbest thing I ever heard. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was worth discussing. What do you think about this idea of a digital original?
Like you, I had the same reaction when I first read this question. I was like, digital originals, it's dumb. It's dumb. So let's talk about it this way. I will out of hand dismiss the idea of redrawing what's been drawn digitally.
Yeah.
For me, the value of having original art is I drew it once and remember, one of the big things we always say, we should also make this one of Brad Geiger's laws of something, but draw it once, get paid for it multiple ways. So when you draw a comic, get paid for it as a print, get paid for it as an original, get paid for it because it got included into a book, get paid for it because it got included 10 years later in a best of book, right?
Yep.
The idea is to do the work once, but then get paid for it in multiple ways.
Yep.
And so this idea, Dorian, of redrawing the thing so that you can sell the original, yes, it generates income, no argument, but you've done the work twice to get X amount of money. And there's no guarantee that having drawn it, that you can then sell it. So you might have drawn the same thing twice for no additional money. So I would heavily warn against that, and I think Brad would too. I can say this
I don't like the idea at all because again, also it muddies what an original art is. The whole idea of owning an original art is saying, look at this image that you see in the book. I own the original that was used to make that image.
Right,
Now what you're
right.
doing is you're making a quasi original in that you made the image digitally, it's in the book, and then you took that out and traced it, and now you're offering them a retrofitted original.
Right.
It muddies what an original art actually is, and I'm not going to make the argument that devalues an actual original, but I will make the argument that it's a different thing, and I think that your potential client is going to value it differently.
You know what though? I will go stronger. I will say that it will devalue the idea of having original art.
Yeah.
I think Brad was probably willing to do that too. No, I'm not being harsh. I'm just saying, like, you were being kind about it. But I think it does devalue what the original art is, and it changes the nature of what original art is.
Yeah.
So both Brad and I would advise against that. But I will say this, Dorian, you have, by hook or by crook, stumbled upon an idea that I never have thought of. And I don't know whether this is a good or bad thing, but the idea of doing the Thomas Kincaid method, and for everyone that remembers Thomas Kincaid, I think he's passed now.
Yeah.
Really the apex of all Western art, don't you think, Brad? Summed up in Thomas Kincaid.
I particularly like when they would sell Thomas Kincaid paintings that had little LED lights embedded in the canvas so that twinkled, so it would be a nighttime scene, and the little cabins would have flickering candles.
My favorite part about Thomas Kincaid's art was when he had people become licensees of his shops, and then he would keep all the money and they would go bankrupt. That was my favorite part of the Thomas Kincaid. That was a really nice business model that I really enjoyed as an artist.
The master of life.
So Thomas Kincaid has passed, and I think probably his estate is still in a large number of lawsuits. But for a while there, he really had a humming machine in terms of taking kitsch art. That his big thing was being the painter of light. It was all log cabins. It was very much like Bob Ross on steroids. So you think it was like trees, cabins, soft evening light. How else would you describe Thomas Kincaid for someone that doesn't know Thomas Kincaid?
Very atmospheric, ephemeral kind of landscapes.
Yeah, which generated, I think at its peak, tens of millions of dollars.
Because they were in every mall.
Yeah,
it was all about marketing. They were in every mall, and it was marketed, and people were told that this was fine art, and so they believed it was fine art, and that it did incredibly well.
And for Dorian's question, one of the things that they did was they would take a print, and it would be a pretty not high quality, but the equivalent of what they figured out how to do about 10 years ago, printing on canvas.
Yeah.
Remember, Brad, when they figured that out about a decade ago? Printing on canvas, and then someone would take, I don't know, what was it, gouache or something, and highlight the whites, if you know what I mean. They would go in and go, do a little bit of gouache. So if someone came up to the canvas, it would have a little bit of three-dimensionality to it. You know what I mean? There would be a little bit of the sort of ephemerality that physical paint gives to an object, right?
And it would look like an original painted piece.
Yeah.
If you enough to fool the regular everyday person that was walking into the mall deciding to make a fine art buy at that point, you could see the paint on the canvas, and it would look, I'm getting an oil painting here. As opposed to a print with some oil paint on it.
And then you would say, yes, this is worth $5,000 to me, and here's my checkbook.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I will be honest, Dorian, that I have, in 20 whatever years of comic making, I have never considered the idea of drawing on a digital print. And yes, it is like the shittiness that is Thomas Kincaid, but also there's something clever to it. So I'm going to give you a lot of points for cleverness because I never thought of this. But I don't know that I would do it, mainly because the only reason why Kincaid could do that is there was such a captured audience for what was a limited product. Like he would sell his originals for just ungodly sums. Then he would sell like 1,000 of the personally touched, gouache highlighted ones into another 1,000 group of people. Then he would sell another 10,000 of the ones that were, what I'm getting at is he had a much larger mass audience that he could figure out these sort of delineations. And I don't have any of that. Yeah. If someone wants an original art of mine, it's just because they like that joke. They like Dave Kellett. They want to have a Dave Kellett on their wall. And this is the best one they've seen in 5+ years of reading. So they're going to buy this one, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like everyone's clamoring for my log cabin that I painted by the hill and you know what I mean? Like it's not the same thing, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Don't you think, Brad?
I think we see this question come up from time to time, and what is at the heart of the question is we've switched to digital, and that means that there isn't original art anymore. But is there some way we could pull a Kobayashi Maru and still have original art? Can we cheat the system? Can we game the system and somehow have
and
original art?
And still call it original, yeah.
And the answer is no. I'm sorry. It's not an original. In fact, somebody wrote in months ago saying, well, could you sell the original file? Is there some way you could put the original file on a zip drive?
All the zeros and ones are fresh from the farm. They're so good.
No, you really, I mean, that's the trade-off on digital art.
I had someone buy an ebook one time, a DRM-free ebook, right? Ebook, no limitations on how many. And they said, do you mind if I share this with my friend? And my response was, there's no limit to that. Your file is yours now. You can do whatever you want with it. Because really, what are they? It's not like they're going to put it resell.
What are you going to do? Tell no, you got to. And what was that book? What, $1.99, $4.99?
Yeah, you know what? Go to town. Have fun.
Knock yourself out. And if you turn that person into a new reader, that's fine. And if you don't, that's fine. The only thing you don't want that person to do is put it up on a website where 1,000 people can download it.
Exactly.
That's not so great. But giving it to a friend, knock yourself out.
The one thing that I will say, Dorian, that you can do, if you're going to do prints, and I do recommend doing prints, I offer that both for Sheldon Originals. When they sell, you can then get the print through Topatico. And I also do it through custom-created kind of poster prints. Like they're basically art images that were created to be a print, if that makes sense. One thing I do to create value on top of that is I will do signed, numbered versions of those prints. And that, I think, is one morally acceptable way to do it, because I don't normally sign my posters or prints, but the signed, numbered ones, I will literally create a little thing in the bottom left corner that says, blank of 50, and then I will hand number in number 1 of 50, number 2 of 50, and then I will sign it. And I think that is morally acceptable to say that this is, because sometimes they are limited. I will only produce those 50, like if it's a Comic-Con exclusive. And sometimes I will say, look, they'll eventually be available on the store, but for right now, it's just the limited number ones. And morally, as an artist, I'm okay with that. Aren't you, Brad? Have you done that before?
And artist editions of your books fall into that same category. Yes. Where and you like what I did with this time was I bought acid-free package labels. Like it was there's 2 on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, right?
Yep.
So and you can actually buy those acid-free, and then I draw on that. And you can do it both ways. Like Erica Moen, when she sent me her book, I got the artist's edition. She keeps it separate, and you can stick it in the book yourself.
Right.
I tend to put mine in the book because I'm just like, I don't want that person to do it wrong. Then say,
By the way, that does happen. Someone came up to Comic-Con with one of those artist edition stickers in the wrong place. I was like, no, I designed a whole special place for it.
Yeah, or just if they put a wrinkle in it, because I do it so much now that I'm very careful. I know what I'm doing. But anyway, artist editions fall into that same category. That's where you can offer original art. Now, this is a great time for us to talk about the idea of scarcity. In other words, you're upset that you don't have originals from your comics to sell. I don't see that as a bad thing. What I see that as is this. When I do a Kickstarter and I've got like at the $300 level or the $500 level that I'll do an inked commission for you, that has added value because there's no place else now that you can buy my original art.
Right.
I've got original art from Greystone Inn and the first few years of Evil Inc., and those actually make really good Patreon rewards for the upper tiers. But there's a scarcity to my original art. So when I do offer an artist edition, I can charge a little bit more because it's scarcity. When I do offer an inked commission, I can put those at a much higher tier because scarcity. So what you're seeing, Dorian, as a negative, I'm seeing as a positive.
Yeah. And I will say one other thing, because this is kind of fun to talk about. It's a little tradecraft of it. If you ever get to the point where you have enough books, 2 ways that I have seen artists create artist edition delineators that are not the ones you were talking about with Erica. I forget what those are called. Not bookends. What are those called?
Plates.
Book plates. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do book plates, and I have done those as well. Those are wonderful. Another thing you can do is there are companies, mailing label companies, that will let you design your stamped mailing label.
Yep.
And normally it would say the Geigers, 121 Geiger Street,
Right.
Philadelphia, PA, that kind of thing. And that's normally what they expect people to create the stamp to look like. But I would just send them an Illustrator file that would say, Dave Kellett Artist Edition 1 of 100 or 1 of 200. And then you can stamp the book, sign it, and number it, right? You can do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
An even classier way that I have not done, but boy, it looks neat. Dave Malky bought a handheld embossing clamp,
Oh,
right? And then he designed an embossing plate that says, this is a specially made Dave Malky beautiful, embossed version.
Wow, what a great idea.
And the description of it is sort of like, this is a special Malky original artist edition signed version, right? But the thing is, in true Dave Malky fashion, it's florid and beautifully designed, but there's something awesome about having embossed paper, like it's been crimped, if you know what embossed, and then he can sign and number it. It's just super classy. It was more expensive than the stamp version, but boy, is it classier, and it lasts forever.
In other words, when you say embossed, that's what a notary public does when they certify a document. They've got that embosser, and it puts the pattern into the paper.
Yeah, it's basically squeezing the paper in such a way between two metal plates that it leaves the design in the paper itself. So you don't want to do it on the cover, but you could do it on the end papers or on the actual paper itself.
Oh, I love that idea a lot.
And I was really in admiration of it. And one of the things that I was thinking about doing was, if I'm going to buy it, I would use it not only for artist editions, but if you ever saw me at a comics convention, I would crimp the book and then sign next to it, because it looks pretty cool when you get it all done. If you have a sketch and a Dave Kellett signature and then this big 3-inch embossment that says like, this book made more special because it was signed and sketched by Dave Kellett.
It's probably a little bit expensive, but you'd use it for the rest of your life.
That's the thing. It's metal. It's not like it's gonna be, break down 2 weeks from now. So anyway, a fun little trick of the trade there, Dorian, as far as making something feel more special. But as far as the Thomas Kincaid method, not a big fan. Although I gotta give you so much credit for the idea of it. I never thought to do that. And so I'm excited I'm always excited by innovation. And that's an innovative way for cartoonists to make money, even though I'm not personally comfortable with it.
Well, and you never know that somebody might hear that and they'll say, okay, maybe the Thomas Kincaid method isn't a good idea, but I've got something else. And you never know what's going to spur somebody in an extra spin of creativity that actually might be a good thing.
You know what? You're right. Because let's say, for example, Brad, you did a special print series that everything was beautifully drawn on like 6 characters, but one character did not have a head. Yeah. And then the artist edition that you're going to do is you will draw different facial expressions for different people of that one head. Like I'm saying, with a 5-minute brainstorm, we could figure out ways to make a version of this work in an interesting way. Mm-hmm. And so I give Dorian a lot of credit for this idea, because I, in 20 plus years, have not thought of that in my own cartooning. So kudos, Dorian, on that idea.
Absolutely. And in the same way that getting original art makes you feel special, just listening to this podcast makes me and Dave feel special. And that's because you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comics.com, and the editor of webcomics.com, which I highly recommend over at webcomics.com. I already said webcomics.com, but now I'm just doing some marketing for webcomics.com.
Thank you so much. And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode like this one. This one comes in from Aaron Chur, who says $5 of joy. A couple of months ago, finances were being reassessed due to COVID, which, by the way, we understand that. We get it. Keep that $5 for yourself. We'll catch up with you later. ComicLab didn't make the cut. Last week, After listening to the latest episode, I realized the amount of joy and information Brad and Dave provide. So I'm back on the Patreon to get the pro tips and access to the Discord server. There are 2 places on Patreon that get some time from me each week. One for my daughter and ComicLab for me. Thank you for what you provide each week.
Wow, that's really nice.
Doesn't that make you feel good?
I really appreciate those kind words. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And listen, we get it in terms of having to take a break from ComicLab for a while. That in terms of financial stuff. That's part of what Brad was saying earlier about it's not about what Brad feels or about how I feel or about any Patreon creator feels. It's about how you are needing and using the Patreon for yourself as a user on the end thing. And that's why, Brad, like I had a lot more churn. I know it's the end of the show, but that had a lot more churn this year Patreon, but my number stayed the same because some people stepped up saying, oh, I see that Dave is giving me value. And other people were saying, oh, Dave gives me a lot of value, but I financially, I can't do it this year. So anyway, all that to say, I get it. And you are on the good list with us, no matter how things shake out, because we really appreciate those kind words. And I'm going to say ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that as though Patreon were being hosted in Scotland. Patreon.com/Okay, the new. Oh, Brad, sorry, someone just entered my podcasting studio and had a quick question for you. He's got a kilt on.
A kilt?
Hi. Here, I'll move off the microphone and you can sit down. Yeah, go ahead. Just ask Brad your question right there. Sit towards the mic and ask him the question, right? Brad, you're weeding up the bit. What you doing with your comics with your data?
Well, I think first you want to use a pencil as opposed to.
It becomes what's funny is like if you do Angry Scotsman, it just becomes a version of the Tasmanian Devil. It's just,